Colin Firth is here in 1995. He earned international notice for his portrayal of Mr. Darcy in the BBC miniseries Pride and Prejudice. Here is a look at some of his work.
In vain I have struggled. It will not do. My feelings will not be repressed. You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you.
It's raining men. Hallelujah, it's raining men.
Jesus. All right. All right. Enough. Enough. Thank you.
Eu vim aqui para te pedir para casar comigo. Eu sei que ser louco, porque mal te conheço, mas às vezes as coisas são muito claras para mim. Não preciso de prova. Eu viver aqui ou tu viver na Inglaterra comigo.
Ai, mas é para a Inglaterra, rapariga. Pode ser que conheças o príncipe William, casas-te, mas é com ele.
Shh.
I can still recall our last summer. I still see it all. Walks along the Seine, laughing in the rain. Our last summer, memories that remain. We made our way along the river and we sat down in the grass.
His latest role may be the performance of his career. He plays a grieving professor in A Single Man, the film directed by Tom Ford. He's already earned a Golden Globe nomination and a BAFTA nomination. Here's a look at A Single Man.
What are you doing this weekend?
I think I might just be very quiet.
You never really did take me seriously, did you, George?
I tried to, Charlie, remember? A long time ago. It didn't really work out, did it? No, Charlie. Sleep tight.
I'm pleased to have Colin Firth at this table for the first time. Lots to talk about, but we were just talking about voice. And I said, in this film, I thought the voice just had a real impact. And you were...
Well, thank you.
You said to me, really?
Yeah, well, people don't notice voice and,
Exactly.
and sound in film as much as you'd think they might. There's a lot of emphasis on the importance of film as a visual medium. And you get a lot of people saying that's really assuming that's all that counts. I spend a lot of my time in Italy where voice is really considered secondary. In fact, they didn't even bother to record sound on a film set really through the 60s, I don't think. And films get
You would
dubbed.
just loop it later or something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fellini apparently had people say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I hadn't even written the script yet.
Oh, yeah.
And you do it later.
Well, you got some of that from 9.
Well, you see it, absolutely.
Yeah.
And, I've some of the biggest battles I've had with Italian friends has been on the subject of dubbing, which I consider to be vandalism, and they can't see what the big deal is. It's all about the face and what things look like. But I think even subliminal sound is critical in a film.
Tom Ford sent you the script for this, and what did you think? What were your response?
Quite a lot of things go through one's mind when that happens, because I had to process a series of very improbable propositions. One was the idea that Tom was making a film at all. I didn't know Tom really. We'd had two brief but quite memorable encounters in which he gave me that stare. I'm sure anyone who's met Tom knows the stare.
Yes.
And
Like, are you crazy?
yes, it is a little. I think, I don't know if Tom's judging you or not. I'm sure he's not. But there's always a feeling of, the minute Tom looks at you, you start to be concerned if your tie's straight and if your hair's in place. And he explained the stare as being about his thoughts about the film and putting me in it. So, yeah, Tom Ford makes a movie. That's already something that took a moment to process. That Tom would choose not something that was to do with what we associate him with, or the world of fashion, or the kind of life that we perceive him to have led, but it was about a gay college professor in 1962, Christopher Isherwood novel, and this felt like something very personal, and it didn't seem to be anything to do with showing off his spring collection. It was it seemed from the heart. And then he was so compelling when he came out to meet me. He's eloquent.
And so what did he say that was so eloquent?
He told me, really, his vision for the film. In a way, it kind of washes through you. He took me through George's day, not telling me who George was, but telling me what George sees. And in some ways, that's the most useful information an actor can have. Because I'm going to be put in a subjective position. I find it much more helpful to me to be told what the stimuli around me are going to be. I need that information, and I will provide the means by which I negotiate all of that and what the obstacles are and all the rest of it. But for Tom to give me such a clear image of George's world, told me about George.
He has said, and others have written, this critical point, is that what he liked about you was the ability to contain emotions but show emotions through your face rather than through some dramatic expression of...
Oh, well, I mean, that's a wonderful compliment from Tom, because that's the kind of acting I admire in others. Right. And it's certainly something which I think is critical to this particular character and the way he deals with things. Because basically if the film is about nothing, if not about putting up a wall, in order to prevent things both coming in on him and the kind of chaos that he feels he's got inside himself. So that protection is all he's got until he makes it to the end of the day. So if he feels a sense of utter despair and he's that far from a complete collapse, his tie pin and his cufflinks are what's holding that in place. The hair has to be right, the shoes have to be... This is... The only control he has are these external things. And they're also to protect anybody reaching out to him, anything that's going to kind of get to him. So it's a kind of edifice that protects him, in a kind of two-way.
It's also an interesting film because it's the last day of his life. This is somebody who gets news and decides that at the end of the day, it's going to be over, and it has a kind of liberating impact on him.
Well, Tom was very preoccupied, and this is one of the things he talked about when we first met, actually. He was very preoccupied by the notion of the present and the ability or inability to inhabit the present. It's one of the greatest challenges I think we have as human beings, and I think a lot of philosophy and religious teaching and spiritual teaching is aimed at that. It's all we have, and yet we don't really succeed in being acquainted with the present moment. And in fact, I think it was John Lennon or somebody said, life's something that happens while you're...
It was John Lennon.
...planning something else.
Right, exactly. Yeah, but there's also, I've seen you take note of this, as a great interview with Dennis Potter, I think it was, in which he looks out the window, and he talks about...
The blossoms.
The blossoms.
Mm-hmm. It's resonated with me for years. I can't remember the exact quote, but... I think it must have gone into some sort of mythology, because a friend of mine quoted it last night completely in a different context.
Yes.
And he said...
It was a series of great interviews.
It was a series of extraordinary interviews, and very courageous. He knew he was dying, and he basically allowed these interviews to be a discussion of the process of dying. And, I mean, it sounds utterly morbid and depressing until you see them. I mean, he doesn't hide the hardship.
Because he sees things with a different eye.
This is it, and this film, I think, speaks to that. He looks out of his window, and these flowers that he's seen every spring, today he knows he'll never see them again. He doesn't know quite how long he's got, but he certainly will not make it to another spring. And he said, today those blossoms are something like the whitest, most beautiful, most vibrant, blossomest blossoms that I've ever seen.
I want to talk about a scene that's so pivotal to this film and have you reflect on it. It is, he gets a phone call telling him that his lover has been killed. And you see in one scene, what I assume is difficult for an actor, which is to go from one emotional state to another emotional state.
It's certainly very difficult to do it in front of a rolling camera,
yes.
Because what we love to do is prepare ourselves before the camera rolls. If you've got despair and devastation, and you can start with that. You say, okay, just everybody be quiet for a moment while I get the despair and devastation going. And okay, I've got it. Despair and devastation. Roll quickly. This was one where you have to pick up. You read the script, and you think, oh, he picks up the phone and he's happy, and then he gets some news, and he has to end in a different place, and then of course you have to do another take, so you have to go back to happy. And fortunately, I worked with a director who had so much understanding somehow or respect for the acting process that he gave it an extraordinary amount of time and space to reveal itself.
He had patience and confidence.
He did, and we shot this film in 21 days, which is a recipe for panic under most circumstances.
First I want to show this scene that we're talking about. Roll tape.
Yes, sir, you have indeed called the correct number. How may I help?
This is Harold Ackerley. I'm Jim's cousin.
Oh, of course. Yes, good evening, Mr. Ackley.
I'm afraid I'm calling with some bad news.
Oh?
There has been a car accident.
Accident?
There's been a lot of snow here lately, and the roads have been icy. On his way into town, Jim lost control of his car. It was instantaneous, apparently.
Oh.
It happened late yesterday, but his parents didn't want to call you.
I see.
In fact, they don't know that I'm calling you now, but I thought that you should know.
Thank you.
I know this must be quite a shock. It was for all of us.
Yes, indeed.
So just looking at that scene we just saw, what's the hardest thing about it? I mean, how do you do, if it's easy to do spare, or it's easy to do some other emotion, how does the actor make sure that he can do both in one take or one role?
I think you just have to think your way as deeply as possible into that character's world and set the stakes up, because you really can't be at the end before you get there. You can't inhabit the beginning. And we had drama school exercises that concentrated entirely on this very thing, because this is something that's obviously going to come up in drama. What happens when the big surprise hits? What happens when you might start a scene in a state of despair and then something happens to completely brighten everything up? How do you get from one to the other? And I think that certainly the way I was trained, which is, to put it very, very simply, it would be a Stanislavski-based idea that you excavate as deeply as you possibly can, and so that you are ready to react as that character at any point. I wasn't particularly aware of doing that. I didn't go methody on it. I didn't spend the day inhabiting
Methody. That's great.
I just sat in a chair, and Tom pointed a camera, and there was just something about the way he communicates the tone that put us all on the same page. Whether it was the grips or the electricians or whatever, we all somehow were in the same world.
Here is what Tom Ford said about your character. Roll tape.
This is a character who is holding himself together by his outer world. His outer world and his inner world are linked. Inside, he's this soulful, romantic, crushed man who's keeping himself together by all of this outer armor, which I can definitely relate to. You know, on a bad day, and this is a good piece of advice for most people, when I have a bad day, I polish my shoes, I put on my best suit.
Yes.
No, I do, because it's armor.
And so there he is. I mean, that's the guy you're playing.
Yeah. There's so much of Tom in this. There's a lot of Christopher Isherwood, there's an awful lot of me. There has to be. For this thing to have any life at all, it has to live and breathe the people that created it. And every interpreter in the process of adaptation has to give something of themselves that's quite significant, I think, for the thing to...
Does he work differently than other directors?
Yes. I mean, I wouldn't want to... I've worked with some truly wonderful directors, but Tom is absolutely up there with the best.
Because?
Directing is a personality thing. There is not one particular set of boxes you have to tick to be the good director. The absolutely perfect director is an impossible commodity. How can one human being know everything there is to know about text and about lenses and about the editing process and pace and about, how to talk to an electrician about his problems, how to deal with the producers, the kind of human relations aspect with actors. I mean, if you've ticked 3 or 4 of those boxes, you're probably pretty great.
But Tom seems to have gone to a certain length to make sure that you and others understood why he was fascinated by this character and why this story was so compelling.
That's exactly right, and I think that the best thing a director can do is to make his vision contagious, is to make it clear and to infect you with the desire to share it and to communicate it. And he has that. I think that's probably what he was able to do with his fashion work.
And that's what I assume actors want. I mean, you know how to get there, but just tell me where you want me to get.
Absolutely.
I'll know how to get there. They're my techniques and my training that'll get us there.
Quite. I mean, I don't mind. There's some directors are very verbose and they give you a lot of detailed instructions. And if that's good, that's good. We talked about Pinter just before.
Right.
Harold was very, very economic, you know? It wasn't...
and precise.
Yes, it wasn't always kindly delivered. It was very rarely anything but technical. It would be, why don't you sit down before you say that line? And you think, okay, I mean, I can hardly see how that's going to make a difference. You tried it, it worked, it solved the scene. Right. Tom actually, in some ways, would have something of that. He didn't say a great deal, but when he did, it was a nugget that would reveal everything. But it was more to do with the fact that it was, as you say, in control before we started. You look at the house, you understand something about George.
Right.
You think, okay, he needs this elegance. It is partly a cozy, wooden-panelled, enclosed space with a fireplace. It's also partly a glass house, which is exposed. George's clothes tell me something about him, just as you heard Tom say, it's where he protects himself. He doesn't need... if I'm sitting at a table and the phone's ringing and I'm alone and I've got a cup of coffee in front of me and I'm not answering that phone and the camera's outside looking through the glass and it's emptiness around me, I don't need a director to tell me that this is a scene about loneliness. He's told me. And that, we all got it. And that was what was wonderful. I felt that there was this, despite the pressure that we were under with these long days and the short number of them that we had, he created the illusion of space and freedom to do things. Julianne Moore said something quite similar. She said there was a sense that you could try anything, that you could use and stretch your imagination to its limits, and yet there was somebody always in control.
All right, take a look at this. Another scene here from A Single Man.
It takes time in the morning for me to become George. Time to adjust to what is expected of George and how he is to behave. By the time I've dressed and put the final layer of polish on the now slightly stiff but quite perfect George, I know fully what part I'm supposed to play. Looking in the mirror, staring back at me, isn't so much a face as the expression of a predicament. Just get through the goddamn day.
There is, in terms of Tom and in terms of the way he makes the character, there's a kind of perfection about
It's neurosis.
It's neurosis, yes.
It's passion. It's deranged. I mean, he needs this so desperately that it cannot be sane. There's nothing serene about this. This is an answer to, I think, some of the critics who find that we're
too ordered.
They're too aware of the style,
right.
And I think
that's exactly what they say.
If we didn't know Tom's history, I think there'd be less of those observations.
Yeah.
I think people would be celebrating the wonderful cinematic sensibility of the man.
Right.
But because we know about the fashion history and all the rest of it, then we see the fashion stuff. Yeah. I understand it, but I think what they're missing is how integrated it is. This stuff is not... These beautiful costumes are not decoration. They are a symptom of a kind of illness, really. Mm. And it's the same with the way Julianne Moore's character dresses. She is holding on to something that's about to fade. She is at war against aging and despair and solitude.
Here's another interesting scene. Roll tape.
Would you like to meet Charlton Heston? He's our scorpion. Every night, we throw in something new to him and watch him kill it. Daddy says it's like a coliseum. Daddy says he wants to throw you into the coliseum.
No kidding. Why?
Well, he says you're light in your loafers, but you're not even wearing any loafers.
Sweetheart, what are you doing bothering Mr. Falconer?
No, she's not bothering me at all, Susan.
I'm glad to see you, George. Jennifer, let's let Mr. Falconer get back to his banking. Goodbye, George.
Bye, Susan. Bye, Jennifer.
What we see there, the humor of the character.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, it's humor. It's humor with an edge all the time. I mean, it's not frivolity, although we see him abandon himself to that as well in the scene with Julianne. But no, he's looking at this child who's expressing all the prejudices that he is on the receiving end of, from his suburban neighbours and probably most people around him. You need to be thrown in the Colosseum, you lighten your loafers and all that stuff. All he's seeing is probably for the first time in his life the sheer beauty of a child. Yeah. And that's his brat neighbour's kid, These kids have annoyed him ever since he's lived there. And what I find that haunts me about the film, and I think haunts a lot of people, is this idea that these beautiful experiences George has are all mundane things. On any other day, they would be mundane.
Does it say anything to you in terms of what you might want to do or what you might have options to do or the kinds of characters that...
It hasn't done anything like that just yet. It's partly because I've been steeped in something else until last Friday.
Right.
And so I haven't really had time to absorb and rethink.
This is a film.
This is a film called The King's Speech, which is about George VI, who was the father of our present Queen.
Oh, yes.
And in the wake of the abdication crisis, which is the A-plot of history, if you like, this is the stuff most of us know about, where the King of England...
This is a great story, though.
Gave up the throne for love.
Right.
Or did he?
Now,
or
was he George the... That was George VI.
That was Edward VIII. George VI is the one who succeeded him,
who was
the younger
the Queen's father.
That's right.
The Queen's father, Queen Elizabeth's father, who succeeded his brother.
That's right.
Who gave the Duke of Windsor, who became the Duke of Windsor.
He went off, became the Duke of Windsor.
For the American widow, American divorcee.
That's right. And you can't...
Wallis Simpson.
Yes, Mrs. Simpson. And you can't marry Mrs. Simpson because you can't marry a divorcee, you can't marry an American. American can't be queen. All these reasons. The brother had a speech impediment. He had a terrible stammer, which he had to seek to overcome. And this film is about his attempt to overcome that. It's about the relationship with the speech therapist.
You spent a little bit of time, or maybe more than I know. Your parents lived in Nigeria.
That's right. My parents were born and raised in India.
Right.
My mother didn't.
Were professors?
Yes, they are still teaching. Yeah. They were children of ministers of the church and doctors. And my grandfather, actually, my paternal grandfather, had been a missionary out there until the age of about 38, and he just looked at people and thought, he joined the British Missionary Society because he heard they were building schools and hospitals.
Yes.
He didn't really want to evangelize. He never converted a single person, in fact. And he said that quite proudly at the end of his life.
Yes, that's right.
But no, he said, I've got to be a doctor. And very few people will train a man that age, but the United States was the only country that would. And so he brought his family to Iowa, and
went to
medical school for 8 years, went back to India and treated people there, and he's sort of a hero of mine for having done that. Then, yes, I started life in Nigeria. I was born in England, but my parents took me when I was really a few days old to Nigeria. My sister was born there, and I was there for my first 4 years.
And then came back to?
Back to the UK. We moved around the UK quite a bit. I spent 1 year in St. Louis in a high school.
Yes.
And I was...
When did you know you wanted to be an actor?
Shortly after that. I was about 12, 13 then. Around 14, it hit me like a bombshell, actually. I was doing some amateur dramatics and really enjoying it. And I was... it threw into relief the extent to which I was not enjoying my daily school life.
Right.
And there were certain aspects I liked about it, which would be obvious looking back now. I was definitely going down the arts route.
Right.
You know, I enjoyed music and I enjoyed literature and storytelling, and it was basically the storytelling thing that was the bug. And I didn't like getting up in the morning. And that's no way to live.
Yes.
You know, the mornings were painful, and
Yes.
because every day I had to face, 2
Well, there's
hours
a
of
story
this.
about you that on the morning that you were supposed to go take your admission to school at some level, you turned over and went back to sleep and said, "It's not for me."
Actually, that was probably one of the most critical turning points in my life. And I'm very grateful to myself for having made that lazy adolescent decision. But I just thought, actor, wait a second. If I wake up in the morning and I know I'm going to do that, I think I might want to get up.
Yeah.
Even if I'm actually washing dishes in the back of a restaurant, knowing that I'm aiming at that, that's still something to get up for.
But you hadn't done much before you got the opportunity to be in another country, had you?
Just drama school. 3 years of drama school. I had done nothing. I mean, that was my first job. And I didn't even graduate because I left in my final term to go and do that. So it was an incredible opportunity, and I've been dogged by the idea that I haven't really paid my dues.
Well, you'll be all right. Thank you.
Thank you so
And
much.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. See you next time.